Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to my look at Endwalker. Having just finished the finale to the MSQ, watched the cutscenes, taken a second to sit down and collect my thoughts enough to throw together a script, I wanted to go through what I loved, what I didn't, and then where I think we're headed next. Naturally, if the thumbnail and this video title wasn't enough, maybe YouTube auto-played you onto this video, there will be nothing but spoilers in this video and the comments, so I highly recommend if you haven't finished Endwalker, you leave now and don't look below. So, with all the spoiler disclaimers out of the way, and to those who remain, I won't be able to cover everything I'd like to in this video, so please let me know in the comments what really got you, as this is a spoiler zone. Let's start with what's great, and although the natural place to start would be the story, I've got some caveats to that one, so I want to start with the visuals. They are incredible. There is not one part of this entire journey from Sharlayan to the edge of the universe that did not look absolutely stunning, and even more importantly, fitting. The Graveyard of Stars that was Ultima Thule was just a masterclass in both how to transition between very different aesthetics, going from dragons to energy people into war robots, and how to create the perfect skybox. I spent ages just looking out at the ruined worlds that dotted the sky in existential dread and awe. Not even to mention the feeling of the modern city in Garlemald, even though it lay in ruins. Sharlayan really feeling like an island of pragmatic scholars, or lastly but not least, Razatan being a tasteful adaptation of Indian architecture. This also extends to all the dungeons and trials as well. The internals of the Tower of Zot really showed the scale of the operation in those towers that we didn't get to see at the end of the Shadowbringers patches. The scene just before the final boss in Vanaspati, with all the flying devils above the two-headed statue of their god, was one of those simply breathtaking moments in gaming. Truly, the artistry that went into this expansion was above and beyond anything they've done before. All of this visual work was just the beginning, however, as I'd like to touch on the music. These are the moments I wish I was more music savvy to explain in any kind of depth what I feel about it, other than it was marvelous. Not just the quality of the music itself, it was also perfectly used to accent every moment that went on. The two moments that highlight this was every encounter with Venat/Hydaelyn, really calling back to the music we first associated with her in Realm Reborn, with the Answers track especially, and then when talking to the spirits of the past on your way up to the final confrontation with Meteion. The last thing that was pure gold are just the mechanics themselves. I haven't tried most of the other classes, but the Dark Knight felt absolutely incredible to use after the changes. Tanking has been fun, and I'm keen to try out even more classes now that I've completed the MSQ. It was nice to be able to get my class gear at 89 before heading out to Ultima Thule, but still, threw in a cheeky Praetorium just to level up to get both the level 90 versions of the armor and be able to diet after the role quests. Then aside from all the classes looking good and feeling good, all the fights were insane. The mechanics for each of these bosses, and doubly so for the trials, were tightly tuned and very interesting. The constellation throwing on the Zodiac fight especially comes to mind here. It was very gratifying going through each of these huge bosses with people and just going through them with trial, error, and determination. Although the exception to that is the fight with Hydaelyn, which is the first and last time it seems that they let us do it with the trust system. It was a truly insane moment where the story meets mechanics when I saw that we were able to do that fight with our fellow Scions. Just a magical moment where we could prove ourselves together, and by God did we earn that seal of approval. Talking about Hydaelyn though, I suppose this is as good a time as any to talk about the story. First and foremost, having a definite finale for a story is both ambitious and difficult, but Endwalker has managed to really pull it off. The biggest defining features of that overarching narrative since A Realm Reborn has been that clash between Zodiac and Hydaelyn, which has been very neatly put to bed during the two of the best fights I've encountered in Final Fantasy XIV so far. In many ways, I was suspecting that we would end up killing both of them going into Endwalker, but in the way that would defeat Zodiac, and then Hydaelyn would turn out to be not as good as we thought, then would need a killer. Thankfully they didn't do that, as I believe having Hydaelyn continue to be a good guy even in death was the right call, considering a lot of our own energy and power comes from her. Although with those two being defeated before the finale, something I wanted to take some points away from Endwalker though was that the final boss was Meteion. I'm not really a fan of bringing up entirely new concepts at the very end and then showing a villain behind the curtain this entire time without much preamble. I may be forgetting something during the MSQ, or maybe there were side missions that I missed previously, but the emotional fabric of reality hasn't been mentioned. But from my recollection, this only started getting hinted at and then resolved all in Endwalker. But something that is meticulously planned planned as Final Fantasy XIV's story, it's a bit of a shame there wasn't much of a hint of this previously. Although I can't take away too many points, as it does fit neatly into the story they were telling, as well as them really taking the time to explore all the reasons of Meteon existing, why she's the avatar of bad vibes, and exactly what's going on. While I'm not a fan of introducing the real bad guy that's even more powerful than all the forces we've dealt with before during the expansion, they really did give it the time necessary to really make it work in the end. However, I suppose saying that Meteon is the final fight isn't exactly true. That honor goes to Xenos. At first, I wasn't a fan of his character. It was very one-dimensional, and there was certainly a little bit of happiness when Fandaniel portrayed him when he took over Zodiac instead of letting Xenos consume him. Upon reflection though, I'd like to go on a tangent to discuss some of the themes in Endwalker. The biggest one naturally is the major philosophical question of why we exist when life is full of suffering and ends in death. From my look at the story, they offer two answers. The first is that sorrow works to both help ourselves improve, as you can only get better through pain, and that it also emphasizes the joys in life, that without suffering you can never feel happy, and it's that lack of happiness that makes life not worth living. The second answer they offer, which ties into that idea of happiness, is the little things in life make it good, be it the small moments with friends like having dinner with Urianger, Y'shtola and Thancred before heading off to Ultima Thule, or just having a hot meal in the wind and cold as we saw in Garlemald after the Imperials joined their forces with ours. It's that idea of the little things which ties everything together and in a way makes Xenos a good final fight. Having just come off the heels of Meteon, who was at the very extreme of the idea of the universe is meaningless, Xeno, by comparison, who's been our mouthpiece of nihilistic ideas since Stormblood, was a step back from that, as even he could find some joy in life. While only wanting to fight you as a pretty one-dimensional character arc, as mentioned previously, you could see that in the final fight he was happy. Although he does mention that such feelings are fleeting, the fact that he could live and suffer the tedium of existence for just those little moments of happiness when he battles you, upon reflection, made him a little bit more of a character. I'm still glad that his story is over, however, as that was as good an ending as you could get for him. And if he'd continued on with us, it probably would have been a little grating. Although, speaking of grating, I'm about to do something dangerous, and that's having an opinion I think will put me on the minority. While I accept I will likely die on this hill, pray listen to my explanation to try and understand where I'm coming from, just as I can ultimately understand why most people won't share this opinion. I really do not like the Loporrits. Them and the entire B-plot of figuring out the world they no longer were part of seemed to serve as a bit of a slow-down method to cool us off after a couple of the big highs so they could start to rebuild the hype for the next story moment. While I don't have an issue with them doing this, as they've done this a million times before, it was to me way too large a departure from everything we'd just been doing. They were too cutesy. In Garlemald, we watched a man put a gun beneath his jaw and pull the trigger over his convictions. Our body was stolen and we desperately ran through a war-torn city to save our friends. We had watched innocent creatures placed in massive magical machines to feed angry gods. Then, at the climax of this section, we killed Zodiac, the broken god built up since A Realm Reborn, and unleashed the final days just as Fandaniel wanted. Then 5 minutes later from that, we go to see the final hope of mankind, and it's rabbits talking about, haha, what do you mean not everyone eats carrots, Lamau? I haven't played Final Fantasy IV or seen any of the tweets showing them as the Beast Tribe on the moon, so I was utterly unprepared for them making an appearance, and coming off that high from Zodiac and all those revelations, especially knowing I was only level 85 and that was the middle of the story, mind you, it was far too hard a break on the hype train and not that steady decline I was used to previously. While Livingway and the Loporrits I imagine will be a fan favourite, as they were a reference to Final Fantasy IV, and they are just generally cute characters, and ultimately let me know in the comments your thoughts. For me personally, once I got the bare bones of their story, I just skipped everything to do with them. Mind you, that B-plot had tons of potential. I just think they would have been better served with, say, an artificial intelligence, or maybe even something like the Ascians who were on Venat's side in the creation of Hydaelyn, in a similar way to all the Ascians who were sacrificed to summon Zodiac, were still with him, except instead of waiting for Zodiac to be whole to be freed, they were waiting for Hydaelyn not to be distracted with having to focus all her energies in maintaining Zodiac, that they could come out in full power and actually start to ferry mankind up onto the star, and then they'd still have the creation magic that the Loporrits had to actually, build the moon up. Just something that was a bit more serious in a way to match the seriousness of what we'd experienced up until that point. Although, as I said at the beginning of the rant, it was overall a truly incredible experience. It was worth the queues, the late nights playing, and just all the time spent in all those expansions previously to get to this stage. While I wish I could cover everything in this video, what I've talked about are the biggest things to me, so please let me know what really really stood out to you in the comments below. The big question remaining though is, what's next? Well, first is obviously going to be the raids of Pandemonium with who is probably the real Azem back in the Unsundered world. My best guess is that the crystal we carry will call us to return back in time to confront the Ravenous Darkness, the mystery man the final cutscene mentioned, which should take us through a couple of patches at least. While I have no guess of what that beast in the darkness could be, I'm willing to predict that'll have something to do with the 12, those gods who really haven't been mentioned over much during the story, and I imagine will become the next overarching divine powers that we'll be interacting with during the final patches and moving into the next expansions. I mainly base this purely on Emmett Selk's conversation before the final boss of Endwalker, who, while he named plenty of places we hadn't visited, only specifically mentioned the 12 as a force we had no clue about. As for where we'll physically go now, for all the remaining patches outside of going back in time to fight Pandemonium, my belief is we'll follow up with our fellow Scions in all the corners of the world that they went off to on their own adventures, with the last Scion we'll be talking to in the final patch being Estinian, as my money is on the next expansion taking us to Meracedia. Meracedia is far south of Eorzea and home of the dragons. Between this continent being mentioned plenty of times during the course of the previous story, Estinian talking to the dragons of Ultima Thule about the successful settlement of them on Theris, and Vitra having some special mission for him, topped off with Emmett Selk specifically mentioning, "Oh, do you even know what's going on down there?" in that same final speech before he disappears into the ether once more. My bet is for a big dragon expansion next. I imagine this will also allow us to follow up on Tiamat and Midgard Sorma, who are both absent from the main scenario quest of Endwalker. This will also likely tie back into the 12, as I mentioned, for these dragons are truly ancient beings, so they'd be likely to know a thing or two about them. Whatever comes next, I am excited for it. I'm super keen to start exploring the world at Endgame, unlocking the new dungeons, and preparing for Pandemonium. Endwalker has been an incredible expansion, and this entire story arc has been beautifully done. I'm excited to see how accurate my predictions were, as the last time I did so at the end of the Shadowbringers vs Shadowlands video, they weren't too accurate, but really, one of those little joys in life is trying to tell where the story is going to go next. As I mentioned, this video is a place of spoilers, so let me know your thoughts freely in the comments below, as I'd love to hear what you guys thought, where you think it's going, just everything. I'm so hyped and I'm excited to hear what others think. Until next time, have an absolutely excellent day.